The coaching dominoes have started to fall, and that is going to impact what the Buccaneers can do in their offensive coordinator search. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'd like to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. I am your host, James Yarcho, writer over at Bucs Report, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. The Bucs have an interesting interview scheduled this week for their offensive coordinator position, and what could be behind door number 2 if they can't land Mike McDaniel. That's all coming up in a little bit. But I wanted to start today off with the coaching news that has transpired over the last couple of days to get caught up on what other teams around the league have been doing and how that affects the Bucs. So we had a couple of head coaching jobs filled. The Falcons have hired Kevin Stefanski as their head coach, which is a name a lot of you are familiar with, and Baker Mayfield is especially familiar with. Stefanski was let go from the Browns after coaching there since 2020. On top of that, they extended defensive coordinator Greg Udinski, so he will be sticking around on that staff. That makes a lot of sense. The defense was playing extremely well late in the season for the Atlanta Falcons. The Titans have hired Robert Saleh as their head coach, so they went defensive-minded there. The Dolphins hired Packers defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley. There's another one that switches from offensive to defensive-minded head coaches. And then, of course, you had John Harbaugh going to the Giants. So the Falcons go from defensive-minded to offensive-minded head coach. The Fins and Titans go from offensive-minded to defensive. But where it starts to get a little interesting is the offensive coordinator hires. So the Detroit Lions hired former Cardinals offensive coordinator Drew Petzing to be their offensive coordinator, removing themselves from the Mike McDaniel sweepstakes. I mentioned last week that the Lions, Eagles, and Bucs had the best situations for McDaniel if he was going to go back to being a coordinator, but the Bucs were the only team of those three with a defensive-minded head coach. So that might have been appealing to him. Campbell and Sirianni would probably still want their hands in the offense a little bit, and I'm not sure that that's something that McDaniel would want to deal with. Turns out that's really what it sounded like. Jeff Darlington tweeted out, quote, "Of coordinator jobs that Mike McDaniel has interviewed for, the Lions gig was the least likely to materialize. Campbell liked McDaniel a lot, but Lions didn't view it as quite the right fit for them. As for other OC vacancies, Mike is very much in play. Ball is in his court," end quote. Reading between the lines there, it probably wasn't the right fit because if McDaniel is joining a team as the offensive coordinator, he is going to want to run the offense his own way, not run someone else's system or have somebody else meddling in the offense. That's why I don't think the Eagles are going to be the right fit either. When it comes to offensive coordinator jobs, I still believe that the Bucs are the best landing spot for McDaniel. However, the Bills decided to throw a wrench in things on Monday morning by firing Sean McDermott. The Bills' head coaching vacancy changes the landscape of the coaching carousel, and McDaniel is likely going to be interested in that job, and the Bills are likely going to be interested in him. Now, Rick Stroud pointed out on Twitter that McDaniel was 2-7 against the Bills while coaching the Miami Dolphins. So it may be a matter of the Bills would look at him and say, why would we want to hire a guy that we consistently beat? My son mentioned, he goes, if you can't beat him, join him. It's like, well, yeah, McDaniel would probably like to join the Bills, but why would the Bills want McDaniel? There are a lot of reasons. However, you take a look at what the Bills have in terms of offensive weapons. You have Josh Allen, you have James Cook, and then you got nothing. You have no receivers, and apparently right before I started recording, it started to come out that was the riff between McDermott and Bean, that McDermott said, this is what we need to compete for a Super Bowl that we don't have. And, the front office execs there did not like that assessment. I I still could see the Bills as one of the few head coaching jobs that he would take over a coordinator job. I think it's the Bills, the Ravens, and then Vegas in terms of head coach openings that McDaniel would have to seriously consider. You have two teams in the Ravens and Bills that can contend now, and then you have the Raiders with some studs on the offensive side of the ball, plus the number one pick to take Mendoza as your franchise quarterback. They're going to look for an offensive-minded head coach to pair with a rookie quarterback and run things for the next 5+ years. That's really the wild card in all of this. I could see Vegas going with McDaniel, Clint Kubiak, Nate Shieldhouse, Joe Brady, one of those guys. They are going to go with an offensive coach. It's just a matter of which one do they feel is the right one. Then the last little bit of news that really doesn't affect the Bucs, but it does kind of affect them in an indirect sense, that the Chiefs have reunited with Eric Bieniemy as their offensive coordinator. Now, as far as we know, the Bucs were never interested in Bieniemy, but that is another intriguing offensive coordinator position that has been filled. Mike McDaniel interviewed with the Raiders on Monday when Tom Brady, John Spytek, and Mark Davis were all in town for the national championship to watch their number one pick and future quarterback. But then he is interviewing with the Chargers for their offensive coordinator opening, and that's another offensive-minded head coach out there. And he still has another interview with the Cleveland Browns for their head coaching job. And I know a lot of people are trying to connect the dots between McDaniel and the Titans now to go be their offensive coordinator under Saleh. And here's why I don't see that happening. I want to get out ahead of this as it's starting to take over social media. First, why would he go there when they interviewed him to be the head coach and then hired somebody else? Second, why would he go to arguably the worst offensive situation in the entire league as a coordinator, when he wants to be a head coach again at some point, and he would have nothing there in Tennessee except for a young quarterback to try and operate his offense with? He has no skill position players. He has no threats. Like nothing. You have Cam Ward, who might be a guy and might not, and then you have nothing else. Third, I understand that he and Saleh are close, but you know who he's closer to than Robert Saleh? Dan Quinn, and he didn't take the Washington job either. So the Titans offensive coordinator job is arguably the worst one out there. So if he takes it, it's based solely on friendship with Saleh and not the actual situation that he's walking into. So we're going to see more of these dominoes continue to fall throughout the week. But as of right now, the Bucs are still strong contenders to land Mike McDaniel as their offensive coordinator. That said, they still have to keep their options open, right? They still have to make sure that they have a list of guys that they would like to bring in, that they feel could do the job. And they are working to figure all of that out, which leads us to an interview with Bengals offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit? You know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster, and they boost your post to people who are the best match for your role. That makes the real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results by using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored jobs credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Nobody knows your money goals better than you. Robinhood puts you in control of your money with tools that work as hard as you do. Locking in on every opening, beating your PR, beating it again, channel that drive into your money. Robinhood puts you in control of your money. You trade stocks and ETFs, options, futures, crypto, all on one platform You can now build and execute your own trades from a desktop with Robinhood's Legends Advanced tools, or take advantage of the new Robinhood strategies with a tailored portfolio managed by a team of experts. You expect more from yourself, so expect more from your money. Get started today at Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Again, that's Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Your money, your move. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You want to check out the Everydayer Club. We got ad-free episodes. We're getting that group chat up and running. There's exclusive perks. The link is in the bio. I'm sorry, in the show notes, not the bio. You guys know what I'm talking about. A familiar name has now popped up for the Buccaneers during their offensive coordinator search. Maybe not familiar to all of you, but for you longtime everydayers, you should remember the name Dan Pitcher from this show during some of the other offensive coordinator searches that we've done over the last 3 years, because I have spoken about him in the past. Pitcher has been the Bengals offensive coordinator since 2024 and has been with the team since 2016. He started as an offensive assistant, then became assistant quarterbacks coach in 2019. In 2020, he was promoted to quarterbacks coach, where he obviously was overseeing Joe Burrow until 2024, when he became the offensive coordinator. Now, this is a young dude. He just turned 39 last week, but he has been part of the staff with Zach Taylor there for quite a while. Now, the whole reason this is coming about is because Taylor gave Pitcher permission to interview with other teams for their offensive coordinator openings if it meant he got the opportunity to call plays, which he has not done in Cincinnati. And I think that's kind of the sticking point. We've talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it a lot until this coordinator search is over. I don't know that Todd Bowles is going to put his own fate into the hands of an offensive coordinator that has never called plays before. Shieldhouse, he's called plays. It was at a collegiate level, but he's done it. Robinson, he's done it. McDaniel, obviously. But Pitcher, never. He finished playing college in 2011 and immediately joined the Indianapolis Colts as a scouting assistant before he moved on to the Bengals. No play calling experience at any level whatsoever, and that might be a deal breaker when all is said and done. However, Todd Bowles is a confident guy. He is confident in his abilities to hit another offensive coordinator home run. So let's say he and Pitcher hit it off immediately. The chemistry is there. Their vision is the same. And this is the guy that ends up being the hire. What is that going to mean for the Buccaneers offense? If you take a look at the Bengals over the last 2 years, they have been a hot mess. And it's tough to fairly judge their production when Joe Burrow has gone down with injury. Numerous other players have gone down with injury, and you have arguably the worst offensive line in the National Football League. They were next to last in the NFL in rushing yards per game and 26th in yards per rush. The Bucs were 7th and 5th. That is a huge drop-off when comparing the two sides. Now, remember, these are the ranks over the last 2 seasons. So the 2 years the Pitcher was the offensive coordinator. The Bengals were 12th in yards per play. The Bucs were 8th. They were 2nd in pass yards per game. The Bucs were 7th. The Bengals were 5th in first downs per game. Bucs were 6th. Bengals were 3rd in third down conversion rate. Bucs were 2nd. They were 3rd in red zone efficiency. The Bucs were 7th. They were 9th in fourth down conversion rate. Bucs were 22nd. They were 4th in points per game. Bucs were 6th. So honestly, outside of the rushing yards where the Bucs had a huge advantage, and then the fourth down conversion rate where the Bengals had a huge advantage, these two teams are not drastically different in their offensive output. It's just a matter of whether or not Pitcher can call plays and understand situational play calling, because that's where Grizz struggled so badly. And shout out to Grizz. He's getting an interview with the Philadelphia Eagles for their offensive coordinator opening, and that might be a perfect spot for him. If he can land as an offensive coordinator on one of these teams that has an offensive-minded head coach and maybe isn't the play caller, but is the offensive coordinator, that might be what he needs to get back into the rhythm of things, continue to learn on the job before he gets his opportunity at play calling once again. But Grizz never had a feel for the game and when to call certain plays. Canales, he struggled with it a little bit during their midseason lull back in 2023, but he got it figured out. Cohen, he had experience, so his midseason lull was injury related more than anything. Grizz, he just torpedoed after the bye, and as all of his weapons were returning, which still baffles me as to how you become worse as you get better players on the field. Pitcher would have plenty of weapons to work with in Tampa, and he's coming from a place that managed a similar type of situation in Cincinnati. Not to the extent that he would have to in Tampa, but they had a lot of playmakers there, and he saw how they were able to navigate Chase and Higgins and Boyd and Chase Brown and Samaje Perine. There were a lot of mouths to feed over Pitcher's tenure in Cincinnati. So I think that with him coming from a situation where they had to do that, and he had to see the way that Taylor was figuring out how to get all his guys the ball, whether it was throughout a particular game or just throughout the season, that is a big advantage to the situation that he would be walking into with the Buccaneers. I just worry that the inexperience as a play caller will be the reason that the Bucs either don't hire him, or if they do hire him, will be the reason that we're going to go through all of this again next year. The midseason lull, the struggles, in adapting your offense to what the opposing defense is doing, and probably the coaching search. It just feels like Bowles, as confident as he may be, or as much as he may like a guy, it feels like he's going to bring in someone that isn't going to have to go through those growing pains. He's going to want someone that has been there and done that. You, in a situation where you were almost fired, and now you have to go out and you have to bring in another offensive coordinator. Do you want to be the coach that gives that coordinator his first true chance? Because you can be an offensive coordinator all day long. If you're not calling the plays, you've never been through that type of situation. You have never had to adjust on the fly. You have never had to properly play that chess game where you do something early in the game to set up something later in the game. That's something that Grizz was never able to truly get a grasp on. If you're Todd Bowles, are you going to risk giving that opportunity to a third coach in 4 years? Because again, Cohen had the experience. Canales didn't. Grizzard didn't. Pitcher doesn't. Are you willing to put your job, as Todd Bowles put it after the Falcons game, this is our freaking livelihood. Are you willing to put your livelihood and the livelihood of all the other coaches on that staff at risk to take your shot on a first-time play caller? I just don't see that being the case. I could be wrong. Like I said, Bowles and Pitcher could hit it off immediately, have an immediate chemistry, which is exactly what happened with Dave Canales, and he could end up being the hire. But I think that they are going to err on the side of caution and find someone that has been there, that has done that, and is not in need of developing those skills in real time. Who are the best bets for the Bucs if they cannot land Mike McDaniel or Todd Monken? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Kicking off the year feeling good is the goal, right? And honestly, hydration is the easiest win. When I stay on top of it, my energy, my focus, my mood all level up. But let's be real, plain water just doesn't always cut it, especially when you're grinding through long days, hitting the gym, or trying to stay consistent with your health goals. That's where Drip Drop comes in, a doctor-developed, proven fast hydration that helps your body and mind work better. Think clearer focus, better energy, elevated mood, even fresh skin glow. As you guys know, one of my sons is a hockey player. The other is a basketball player. They have fallen in love with Drip Drop. Instead of having to lug around a bunch of cases of something else, I packed our bag of Drip Drop, and my son used it all weekend in Nashville for his hockey tournament, filled the water bottle up, poured in that grape flavor that he loves, had a little bit of strawberry lemonade too, but he loves the flavor and what it does to keep him hydrated during those hockey games. Right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's championship weekend, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action, because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to the bets that you like most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. You make your picks, then apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs keep rolling. The New England Patriots are 5.5-point road favorites over the Knicks-less Denver Broncos, while the Seattle Seahawks are 2.5-point home favorites over their NFC West rival, the Los Angeles Rams. Seattle is still the favorite to win the Super Bowl at plus 145, followed by the Rams at plus 210, Patriots at plus 240, and then the Denver Broncos all the way at plus 1,300. Visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, and let's just say it's the worst case scenario. Okay, McDaniel takes a head coaching job. Monken goes with Harbaugh to New York, or takes a head coaching job of his own. Where does that leave Tampa in their search? Who are the most likely people behind door number 2? And while I think this may upset some of you, I think the most likely candidate to be the offensive coordinator, if it isn't McDaniel or Monken, which honestly, I think this guy's probably a more likely candidate than Monken. I think if Monken doesn't get a head coaching job, he's going with Harbaugh. So if it's not McDaniel, I think it's going to be Zach Robinson, who was the offensive coordinator for the Falcons since 2024. I know for sure there's a couple of insiders and all access members that won't be happy about it because they've been texting me about it quite a bit. But I honestly think that Zach Robinson would be a really solid hire. He's someone that a lot of Bucs fans wanted back when they were doing their previous offensive coordinator searches, and he was a name that was talked about a lot before the hiring of Liam Cohen. Yeah, he has the play calling experience now. And I think something that gets easily forgotten were all the injuries that the Falcons dealt with over the span of Robinson's tenure. Kirk Cousins was not the quarterback that they thought he was going to be. And then you had Michael Penix, who you all know I was not high on at all coming out of the draft, but he was in and out of the lineup with injuries each of the last 2 seasons. You had Drake London missing time each of the last 2 years. You had virtually no one after him in the receiving core when he was out. So it was Bijan, it was Pitts, and then it was a bunch of guys. Even then, you had the Falcons and the Bucs right next to each other in a lot of these offensive metrics. Now, these are going to be the same numbers for the Bucs that I just mentioned with Dan Pitcher, but I'm sure you guys listening or watching didn't memorize those numbers, so I am going to say them again. But yards per play, Falcons were 10th, Bucs were 8th. Rush yards per game, Falcons were 8th, Bucs were 7th. Pass yards per game, Falcons were 9th, Bucs were 7th. Here's a big one, though. Sacks per pass attempt, Falcons were 3rd, Bucs were 13th. First downs per game, Falcons were 10th, Bucs were 6th. Here's another big one, though, on the flip side. Third down conversion rate, Falcons were 26th, Bucs were 2nd. Fourth down conversion rate, Falcons were 13th, Bucs were 22nd. Red zone efficiency, Falcons were 15th, Bucs were 7th. Goal to go, Falcons were 8th, Bucs were 18th. They're not too far apart in a lot of these categories. So I don't fully get why so many are off the Robinson train. This is still a guy that comes from the McVay tree. This is still an offense that is going to be similar to what they ran with Cohen. And now Robinson would have the tools to truly succeed with it. He didn't have a true wide receiver 2, 3, or 4. Now he's got more wide receivers than he's going to know what to do with. No, he would not have Bijan Robinson. No one has a Bijan. He's the best running back in the league. Bucky, however, is not a bad consolation prize. He has a quarterback that he can trust to go out there and run the system because he's seen it firsthand the last 2 years. This, to me, would be a really, really good hire for the Bucs. It's not the splash that you would get with McDaniel, but it's certainly going to make a splash. And while I think that Robinson is the favorite inside that building after McDaniel and Monken, the other name that I think would be towards the top of their list, well, let me rephrase, might be a little bit more of a dark horse. This is a guy that they haven't talked about a lot. They have interviewed. He's not getting the attention on social media that obviously McDaniel or Monken or Robinson or Shieldhouse are getting, but it's Mike Kafka. This is a guy that has a solid history. He worked under Andy Reid in Kansas City. He was part of the Chiefs staff that lost to the Bucs in Super Bowl 55. He was the quarterback's coach and passing game coordinator that year for the Chiefs. But then in New York, he was the offensive coordinator before being elevated to interim head coach after they fired Dable. So it seemed like last year they were starting to figure things out in New York. He had a great year with Daniel Jones and Barkley that led to Jones getting that massive extension before things got derailed the next year, and Jones was ultimately granted his release after requesting it. But then injuries derailed things. Last year you have Dart and you start looking really competitive. Then you lose Malik Neighbors. You lose Cam Scatterbo. They were still in the top 5 in rush yards per game. Even after losing Cam Scatterbo, they're middle of the league in points per game, top 10 in first downs, middle of the league in third down conversions. There was a lot of positives last season for the Giants offense when they were using guys like Darius Slayton and Tyrone Tracy and Isaiah Hodgins. That's not a lot to work with, but they still produced. They still stayed extremely competitive in a lot of these games. They had a huge losing streak, but you lose to Denver by a point. You lose to Chicago by 4. You lose to Green Bay by a touchdown. You lost to the Lions in overtime. You lost to Minnesota by a field goal. I truly think that it was the defense with all those pass rushers and all those playmakers and all that talent on that side of the ball that let the team down more than the offense did. I think Kafka could do really, really well someplace where he has more to work with than a rookie quarterback and then a handful of meh guys. They were doing a lot with a little. Imagine what Kafka could do with just a lot. A top 5 offensive line, the number 1 top to bottom wide receiver core in the league, Bucky Irving and whoever they bring in to replace Rashad, and then a guy who halfway through the season was among the top MVP candidates. That's an offense that Kafka could do some damage with. And like I said, I would list him as kind of a dark horse candidate here because I truly think that if it isn't McDaniel, it is going to be Robinson. Now, that can obviously change the longer the McDaniel saga drags on because Robinson could get sick of waiting and take an offer elsewhere, which would change a lot of the offensive coordinator landscape. I get that some of the teams are waiting for Super Bowl teams to be done playing or these Final Four teams so that they can interview guys that are all no staffs, that are still working. We haven't even filled half of the head coaching jobs, but these guys that are in the running for head coach are going to wait it out, and that's going to limit who is available once all those vacancies get filled. Mike McDaniel very much still in the head coach running. Todd Monken getting another interview with the Cleveland Browns. These are guys we haven't even heard anything about Sean McDermott yet and where he could potentially go. That's going to affect some things. So the Bucs, while I think a lot of these coaching vacancies are going to be filled before the end of this week, the Bucs could still be left waiting because McDaniel has to decide what he's going to do. Then you have other head coaching vacancies that'll get filled after championship weekend and again after the Super Bowl. And, hopefully the Bucs have their answer by then. Hopefully Mike McDaniel just calls them up and says, you know what? I've had these head coaching interviews, but I want to be in Tampa. I want to run this offense. I think it's a great spot. I think it's perfect for my system, and they get it done. Beyond that, we're still in hurry up and wait mode. That's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank you for tuning in. Make sure that you come back tomorrow. We'll be joined by Evan Klosky, as I always am. We'll have plenty more to talk about regarding the coaching search. Until then, please Make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe or follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs in both of those places. Become an all-access member. Check out the Everydayer Club. The link is in the show notes, or go to lockedonbucs.supercast.com. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to be in the Everydayer Club, it's real simple. Like this episode on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.